Welcome to Rights in Russia's monthly English interview. It's April 30th, 2025, and our guest today is Andrea Gullotta, an associate professor in Russian at the University of Palermo. He is vice president of Memorial Italy and also works closely with the International Memorial Association. Andrea, who taught previously at the universities of Glasgow and Padua, is an expert on the history of the Gulag and the author of the book Intellectual Life and Literature at Solovki 1923 to 1930, the Paris of the Northern concentration camps. He's also editor-in-chief of Autobiographia, journal on life writing and the representation of self in Russian culture. His current research continues to focus on the influence of state repression on Russian literature in the Soviet Union through sourcing, mapping, and reinterpreting poetry, autobiographical works, and fiction that's related to socialist-inspired state repression. Welcome to Rights in Russia, Andrea. It's good to see you again.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here again. Thank you for the invitation.
We last spoke in February 2022 on the eve of the shutdown of Memorial in Russia and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Could you bring us up to date with what's happened to Memorial since its closure?
Yeah, the has been a tough period, as you can imagine. Of course, it has been for many people, including Memorial, of course. Um, the, uh, the government shut down the two main branches of Memorial, which was Memorial International and the Center for Human Rights. Many activists were forced to emigrate after this event. Many of them had actually trials ongoing on them. Many of them had searches at their home. Many of them, of course, went on the streets to protest against the invasion. This caused a rather complicated situation whereby the whole movement was somehow scattered around and dispersed between who remained in Russia. And let's not forget, there's still little branches of Memorial in different places in Russia who still continue to work. And those who have been thrown outside or have been forced to exile, and those who have been arrested, a few of them, including Ali Karlov, who was then freed in the prisoners exchange last August. But abroad, all the different memorials, those that were already there, like the Italian Memorial, and those who were created after the situation, decided to create a federation, which eventually led to the creation of the new International Memorial. It's called now the International Association Memorial, and it continues the work of the former International Memorial. And not, I think it's noticeable that one of those is Memorial Ukraine, because Memorial is one of the few Russian movements who keep on having good relationship with its Ukrainian colleagues and friends. And in Russia, the most important thing that happened is that Memorial recreated a new center for human rights. And this is doing a huge work in documenting what's happening, defending people, and providing legal assistance to a lot of people who are under repression right now in Russia.
And this is a center that's in Russia. They're
Yes,
right.
yes, that's one of the center in Russia. Yeah, that's been recreated. Yeah.
You're also president of Memorial Italia. So what does that organization do?
The organization was created in 2004 following an exhibition on the Gulag. It was one of the exhibitions of the Memorial, which was brought into Italy. It was the first exhibition on the Gulag in 2003. And the people who organized this, which were people that were friends and collaborated already for many years with the people in Memorial in Russia, decided to create an Italian branch of Memorial on the example of what happened already in Germany. And so Memorial Italia is one of the oldest foreign branches of Memorial. For many years, it worked as a small association of mainly academics that organized exhibitions, publications, conferences. But of course, after the beginning of the large-scale war waged by the Russian army against Ukraine, the role of Memorial Italia changed completely. Where first of all, the members of the Italian Memorial went from 25, 30 to 90, nearly 80, 90. There were lots of people who really wanted to do something to help the situation. We also acquired a new, let's say, institutional role. So we worked a lot with politicians and the government to help Russians in peril. We were involved with a lot of initiatives, public initiatives by associations, by organizations, by institutions who asked our opinion as experts of the situation. We published a lot, it's always been sort of one of the main one of my main activities. Now it has really increased to the point that we've published a lot of also books that have had a huge success. For example, we've published on as soon as the large-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Russian army started, Corriere della Sera, which is one of the most important newspapers in Italy, asked us to do a special book on three books on the situation, and those had they were sold out in 1 week. All of them, which was good because unfortunately in Italy we struggle a lot with propaganda, with pro-Putin propaganda. And so our role in this sense is quite important. And activities continue. We are organizing a summer school, we organize conferences. We're organizing, for example, a conference on human rights in November. We have dozens of events scattered throughout Italy, and we're also involved in a series of international partnerships with other memorials as well. So it's a small but very active association, I would say.
Very active indeed. You've been following the fate of the Russian historian and activist, Yury Dmitriev. What's his current situation, and what's the significance of that case?
Well, the case of Dmitriev is a sad one. His case actually started quite before the full-scale persecution, I would say, of Memorial and of what happened afterwards. He was imprisoned on clearly false charges in December 2016, false charges of pedophilia. He's been basically acquitted from 2 trials, and every time the state canceled the trial and restarted again until the last one ended up with a sentence of 15 years in a penal colony, which is now serving. He is in a penal colony in Mordovia. Unfortunately, his health has deteriorated quite significantly, and we are very worried for that. But Yury Dmitriev in all this story has been absolutely fantastic in how he's never let himself down. He's always continued to face the destiny that he's been called to face in a very brave way. And just to give you an example, he's always continued to work throughout the time that he's been serving in prison. He's published already a book when he was still in prison, and now that he's in a penal colony, he's writing a history of the place where he is sitting, which used to be a former Gulag. He is an extraordinary man, and his case has been significant mainly because it's been one of the most important and most dramatic, I would say, episodes of the memory war that the Russian state has waged against Memorial and other independent organizations. Dmitriev is active in the city, well, was active, unfortunately, we have to use the past tense, in the city of Petrozavodsk, which is close to Sandarmokh, mass burial place, which he himself discovered together with Veniamin Yofe and Irina Flige, 2 other activists of Memorial, and with the help of Ivan Chukin, another activist of Memorial, who unfortunately died just before the place was discovered. And this place became a very important place for the memory of the victims of Stalinism and also for different nationalities, including Ukrainians. This is a place where most of the so-called executed Renaissance, which was an intellectual movement of young people, which in the 30s gave a completely new idea of culture in Ukraine. And all these people were arrested, and most of them were executed exactly in Sandarmokh. This place of memory has been quite important until the state started to somehow be interested in that. And while the first breaking point was after the invasion of Crimea, the annexation of Crimea by Russia, where the Ukrainian delegation refused to go, and Dmitriev and others who stepped during the celebration in 2014 were very critical of the government. 2 years down the line, Dmitriev was arrested. Later on, another person which was important in the preservation of Sandarmokh, Sergei Kaltirin, was arrested on similar charges and he died in prison. And alongside all this penal history, the state started promoting an idea which was supported by two historians who said that they had no proofs whatsoever about the fact that Sandarmokh was also the burial place of soldiers of the Soviet army, of the Red Army, killed by the fence. Historians worldwide agree that this is not possible because the front of the line was quite far away from this place, and because this was a secret place known only to NKVD officers. But still, people were sent. The army actually was sent to excavate the graves and to try to change the name and the nature of the victims. And so it has been an important case. Dmitriev was clearly innocent. There has been a huge campaign in his defense. And regardless of all the efforts of the international community and of Russians, many Russians have stepped in favor of Dmitriev. Unfortunately, Dmitriev is still in jail. But he's keeping on resisting, even though his conditions are quite harsh.
So you mentioned Sandarmokh and the role of the government in contesting that it happened at all. I wondered what steps the Putin regime has taken to control memory and public knowledge of Russian history more generally.
Well, this is something that the Putin regime has been doing for quite some time now. It started mildly with the rewriting. Well, I shouldn't say mildly, but it is already in itself quite a strong action. The rewriting of the history textbooks for schools and for higher schools. And then with time, the interest by the state and in this specific part of history, in this specific page of history, the one of Soviet repression, has increased significantly. In 2012, the government launched a new strategy for culture, and the strategy included a specific section on memory, which was aimed at interpreting memory as something that had to be confronted, but had to unify the Russians together. And while reading the whole policy may be quite boring, but the events suggest that what happened is that the state pursued a strategy by which every independent voice had to be silenced, and the state had to take ownership of memory of the Gulag, of repressions, to put forward what has been summed by Putin himself during the opening of in 2017 of the new monument to victims of Soviet repression as the strategy of, yes, it has happened. Yes, let's not forget that, but let's not set scores with the past. And so the voice, for example, of Memorial has always asked for a trial for the people responsible for the crimes. No one has ever spent one day in jail for the crimes that have been committed in the Soviet Union. The voice of Memorial that published the name of the perpetrators, the voices of Memorial that gives voice to the variety of people that have been victims of Soviet repression, including minorities, including religious minorities, and so on, has been seen as something significantly negative for the government. Meanwhile, the government has put forward its own agenda. It has somehow recreated the Museum for the History of the Gulag, which used to be a small museum in the center of Moscow and then has been refurbished and launched in 2015 with a new management, which was recently actually replaced. And the memory is still being somehow controlled by the state, and the history in general, as you have seen by the speech that Putin made just before the beginning of just before 24th February 2022, history, and in particular some pages of this history, are particularly relevant for the government. And so it is still going, a campaign to control history. For example, what happened in Katyn is quite significant. It's a massacre that everybody knows. We also have a cover documents and the official recognition, which was made by Gorbachev, about the responsibility of the Soviet Union in the massacre, which was perpetrated by the NKVD on the direct request of Stalin in Beria. Still, now this is being challenged. There is a movement which is taken forward by a series of important personalities within government as well, that says that what came out in those years has been based on an emotional reaction to the events, and that the history of Katyn and of those executions should be seen again with a different approach. And this different approach is somehow crept through by the fact that in the place where thousands of Polish officers were killed, there have been put the busts and the monuments of Stalin, of Dzerzhinsky, and some of the people that executed these people, which is something that is quite shocking and gives somehow an idea of the type of control that the state is trying to put on that specific part of history and of memory, of course.
Much of your research has been about the Gulag, the Soviet Gulags, and writers such as Solzhenitsyn and Shalamov have written a lot about the Gulag. Are they still being read and discussed?
In Russia, yes.
In Russia.
They are. And this is quite interesting because while unfortunately they have not, I would say, entered, well, Solzhenitsyn a little bit, Shalamov surely less, they have not entered the, what, let's say they don't have the space that they probably deserve to have in the history of Russian literature today. They're still being researched, they're still being read, but there are websites devoted to both writers with a constant update of what is happening in terms of research, in terms of initiatives for those writers. There are conferences for young researchers organized both for Shalamov and Solzhenitsyn coming up in this summer in 2025. But what is interesting is that while they are being, the heritage is still being pursued and taken forward in Russia, abroad, the situation is rather significant, rather different, because while Shalamov is still being studied quite extensively and read, but just to give you an example, in Italy we held in 2022 a big international conference for the 40th anniversary of his death. And we're now preparing the proceedings of that conference for an important international journal. We also have recent publications of Shalamov in many languages, in Italian and other languages. Solzhenitsyn has somehow remained in the shadow, and this possibly is due to the fact that of the last years of his life, he moved more towards more, let's say, nationalistic or / imperialistic ideas, or this is at least the opinion of many people, and this is has reduced significantly the amount of publications devoted to Solzhenitsyn abroad. But I would say that they're still being read, although possibly the whole picture of the Gulag, the literature of the Gulag, has remained in the shadow, and it's difficult to bring it to the first surface. But this is what we're trying to do, for example, with the project that we're doing right now in Italy.
And so what are the specific aspects that might distinguish memory in Russia from that of some other countries, Italy, for example, or possibly the UK?
Well, the path of memory, and in particular the memory of repressions, has been particularly difficult in Russia because, well, first of all, most of the events related to repression, for example, those ones of the Great Terror, 37, 38, were taboo for many, many years, for many decades. People could not speak openly about what happened in the family history, or even in of their own experience of repression for many decades. And when this was finally possible, which was under Gorbachev, I mean, under Khrushchev, there was a small opening, but it didn't lead to a complete opening of society about the theme of repression. And repression was still going on. In fact, it was, under Brezhnev, we had repressions that lasted up until 1985. And so when Gorbachev made it possible, most of the survivors had disappeared. And even though the state tried as much as possible to support the recovery of that memory and of the and of the history that had been hidden also by the state, which kept the archives closed. This lasted for a very small period of time, and it didn't lead to important things, for example, like a Nuremberg process, which never happened for the Gulag. They started a process against the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, but that led to nothing because then the Soviet Union collapsed. And the 90s, as we know, have been a very difficult period for Russia, a period of massive changes to a different economical system, a period of great crisis, the constitutional crisis of 1993, for example. There has been a period where the Chechen War started. So in this time, the process of the recovery of memory that had started was somehow interrupted and led to the fact that for many, many years, this memory was somehow left hanging in the hands of the NGOs and of the people who wanted to keep it going. For example, Memorial, but also other associations like the Sakharov Center and other small associations that maybe are less renowned. And so the fact that the state didn't invest enough in a memory policy back then when it was being created led to the fact that then when the state eventually took interest in the topic of memory, it did it in a different way, and it did it in a way that we've seen has been rather repressive, and that led, for example, to the closure of most of the independent NGOs like Memorial and the Sakharov Center, which were active in the field of memory. In other countries, we've seen the opposite. For example, in Italy, the memory related to World War II, which is possibly the most important part of the national identity, the partisan liberation from Nazi fascism, has been for many years supported by the state. There has been a huge investment in the creation of memory places and the creation of dates, which were very important for national history and for the formation of national identity as a post-fascist country. And then over the years, this has changed because, for example, the memory of the victims of the Foibe, the victims of Tito on the border with Yugoslavia, which were killed by the communists, had been forgotten for many years, and their memory was recovered only recently, I would say 30, 40 years ago. And only now they have become part of a national memory. And the changes that are happening right now, where even the memory of the partisan movement are being somehow contested. These are all changes that happen from society, not from the government. So the dynamics are rather different. And even though we have seen that these events have become a fundamental part on the construction of national identity, unlike the Gulag in Russia, which has been somehow put to a corner because it's a difficult topic to face and to fit into the nationalist agenda of Vladimir Putin. In Italy is the opposite. There is a memory that has been formed, which now is being challenged, but by society in a way. So the different situations, and they are problematic, all of them, of course. But you were mentioning the UK, but see what happened with the colonialism, the fact that it's something that came in society, but came mainly from society and not from the top. But the dynamics are very different, but they're all very interesting and problematic, of course.
Memorial and others have documented that the number of political prisoners in Russia is increasing rapidly. So how would you compare the current situation with the Soviet era? Is it comparable to the times of Stalin, or maybe more like the Brezhnev years? Is it something very different? And could you just speak about a little bit about the conditions for prisoners these days as compared to those endured by prisoners in the Gulag?
Yeah, the situation is serious, rather grim, I would say. It would be hard to compare it to Stalin because of the scale of repression, of course, and because under Stalin, as we know, there were mass executions, which thankfully are not happening right now, as we are aware. Well, at least not in the Russian places of detention. But if you compare it to Brezhnev's time, Memorial has been monitoring the situation for many years. And already before the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the situation was quite heavy, and the number of political prisoners was already more than the ones that were recorded under Brezhnev. Now the numbers increased even more. We're up to 1,000 political prisoners, but let me say that the Memorial and other institutions mentioned someone as a political prisoner after a very thorough exam of all the situation, which is something that takes a long time. And so Memorial, Over the Info, and the other agencies that work on the topic specify always that the number is surely higher than what they officially are right now. But the number is significantly higher, and the situation in the places of detention varies from case to case. We're aware of the use of torture in many situations. We're aware of many cases of prisoners whose access to medicine is being blocked, whose health situation is quite serious. And one of them, as I said, unfortunately, is Dmitriev himself. Um, but we're also aware of situations where prisoners are treated fairly normally. It really depends from place to place. What we know, though, and what is very worrying, is that there is a tendency to increase the terms of the prisoners, of the political prisoners. So now we have many of them which are accused to be terrorists. Because, for example, being part of the LGBT community can lead to a charge of being a terrorist. Recently, as you know, possibly the writer Boris Akunin has been declared a terrorist, even though he lives abroad. Just to give you an idea of how broad the concept of terrorism right now is. There are all the religious confessions that are being targeted. For example, Jehovah's Witnesses and Muslims as well as quite heavily targeted. These charges of terrorism lead to very high and very long terms, up to 25 years in some cases. Plus, there is the case not only of people who protest against the war in Russia, but also prisoners of war who are treated as terrorists and are kept in custody with very long terms as well. In these cases, also sometimes 22, 25 years. Unfortunately, some of them die. We already know of 8 cases last year, including Navalny. And the case of Navalny suggests that the situation is very serious. We're talking of not only of a person, a figure that was famous worldwide and that had the eyes on the world on him. Well, on Russia, I would say the eyes of the world were on Russia. But we're also talking of someone who was in fairly good health before he started being poisoned, before ending up in prison, before being sent to a very tough prison colony in the Arctic area. And this led to his death. We don't know the details of the death, but of course, he's been killed by the very fact of being held in those conditions. The situation is very worrying. It's very worrying right now. Memorial, together with other associations, together also with Ukrainian Association, this is important to say, is doing a public campaign which is called People First, which calls for the immediate release of all the people who ended up in prison or in custody or who have been deported due to the war on both sides, on Ukraine and Russia. And this would include not only the political prisoners, but also, for example, the 7,000 Ukrainian citizens who have disappeared, who have been taken to Russia and who have been kept in Russia and removed from the areas that have been invaded by Russia, and the children, of course, which are the center of the case that led to the incrimination of Putin at the International Crime Tribunal in The Hague.
Mm-hmm. You edit the academic journal Autobiografia. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you tell us something about your publication policy? What's its goal, and how's it related to your other academic work, this journal?
Well, yeah, the Autobiografia was an idea of my colleague and friend now, Claudia Criveller. She hired me on a project which was devoted to the study of autobiography in Russian culture. And as we were working together, we realized that there were significant gaps because Russia has a very important tradition of studies on autobiography, which was completely ignored or mainly ignored in the West. And vice versa, there were lots of important studies on the topic in the West that were completely ignored in Russia. And so we decided to create this journal, which had the aim of working as a bridge between these two traditions. And it exists already. It's now more than, well, 13 years now that it exists. Ever since the beginning, it has been studied as an international peer-reviewed academic journal. So every article, we accept every submission, of course, on the topic of autobiographies has to be related to the broad idea of life writing, which includes also biography, letter writing, diaries, and so on. And we've also opened ourselves to other Slavic cultures. So recently we're doing a few articles in Ukrainian culture as well. We work with a section that is devoted to a topic in particular, so a special issue, and then to a miscellaneous general section where we accept and publish the articles that, of course, go through peer review. We also have a section where we publish unpublished material or discussions or interviews. For example, in 2022, just before the beginning of the war, we hosted an important section where I think 8 Russian writers wrote about their approach with autobiography and their writing. Among them, there was, for example, Lyudmila Ulitskaya, there was Mikhail Epstein. So it was a very interesting section. And then, of course, we have the review section where we published a few reviews about books that are related to life writing. This clearly is important for my research because my main area overall is the literature of the Gulag, literature related to Soviet repression. And so the autobiographical side is, I would say, very important for this type of literature. And so, yeah, well, we're currently working on the 2024 issue, which has been delayed for a series of technical problems, which will host a special section related specifically to the study of autobiographical writings related to repression, state repression in socialist countries, including the Soviet Union. And they should be published within a month.
And this is an online publication?
Yes, it is an online open access publication, so everything is visible online and on the website www.autobiografia.com. And everything we've published, everything we've done, it's always been open access, so everything you find there is downloadable and readable by everyone.
Excellent. Sounds fascinating. For my last question, I'd like to get your views on current Russian literary culture and whether it has been impacted by the Putin regime. Is there an ongoing conflict, and what would the whole landscape, literary culture, look like after Putin?
Well, what will happen after with the literature, I think with everything, I think will depend heavily on how the story will end and what will come afterwards. But surely, under Putin, the culture has changed a lot. Overall culture, not just literature. There has been somehow a revival of the old intelligentsia fight against power, which has not been that straightforward, to be fair, because and if we stick to literature, but we can talk also of, for example, other fields, like, for example, theater. There has been state support for a few years, and then this has created to some gray areas. And there has been a few writers, poets that have been in favor of Putin's policy, and this, of course, has continued up until now. But a very large section of Russian literature right now is opposite to the current regime, to Putin. Many writers live abroad. Well, I would say that some of the greatest names right now of Russian literature, Mikhail Shishkin, Lyudmila Ulitskaya, Boris Akunin, and Guzel Yakhina, I can continue to make a very long list, live abroad right now and live in exile because of the current political situation. Some of them have fought quite openly against the regime, for example, Ulitskaya Akunin. Some others have left because they just felt that they could not stand living in a country that was being so repressive, and in particular after the beginning of the war, this has changed the situation. But as I said, many others instead support the state. We have had some writers, for example, Zakhar Prilepin, who's been very proactive about the war to the point of even criticizing Putin for being too mild under many points of view. And as you know, Zakhar Prilepin has been victim of a bombing last year, and we don't have many news about what his condition is right now and what is writing on right now. But in Russia, there is, for example, a whole section of poetry that started, which is called the Z poetry, and linked to the Z that appeared just before the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, where many poets are writing poems that justify the war and that go in favor of what is happening and that somehow are ancillary to what the state does. On the other hand, there is a lot of clandestine poetry. There is, and some of them have been translated and published. There's some of them, for example, in English, recently, Russian anti-war poems, I think it's the title of the book. And so there is quite a strong movement against the war as well right now, both in Russia and abroad. The page, I would say, overall is quite fragmented and is quite opposite. Now, the situation are quite in opposition. There's not many people that can stand on the border between the two factions right now. But I think that we will see what happens afterwards. But if we are going to go through a scenario that may resemble what happened with the end of the Soviet Union, possibly these writers will probably have a different space also in Russia, and possibly try to change the face of the pro-state literature that is currently being produced. But as I said, this is something that it's quite impossible to forecast. We're going to have to see what happens.
Just have to guess. Well, thank you so much, Andrea Gullotta, for these updates on Memorial and for sharing your perspectives on the past and current interplay between culture and politics in Russia. We wish you the very best and hope to see you again on Rights in
Thank
Russia.
you. Thank you very much, and it will be a pleasure to come again.